Forrest Gump is one of those all-time classic movies that most of us have seen literally dozens of times since its 1994 release. Between Tom Hanks' Oscar-winning performance, the excellent ensemble cast, amazing direction, and witty, heartfelt script, it's an enduring classic for so many good reasons. But no matter how well you think you know this movie, there will always be one or two things you missed, so let's take a look at some of them now. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 20 things you somehow missed in Forrest Gump. 20. Elvis is voiced by Kurt Russell. Of the many ways Forrest influences the world throughout his life, one of the most amusing must surely be teaching Elvis Presley his famous jerky dance moves. And though Elvis was physically portrayed by Peter Dobson in the film, his voice was dubbed in afterwards, and you'll never guess who that voice belongs to. He lent his voice to the film as a favour to Robert Zemeckis after previously playing Presley in the 1979 TV movie Elvis, for which he received a Best Actor Emmy nomination. You'd never guess it simply by listening, but that is Kurt alright. 19. Dirty shoes, clean laces. One of the very first shots we see in the film is of Forrest sat on the famous bus stop bench, in which there is particular attention paid to his very dirty shoes with weirdly clean laces. This is telling not only because the condition of the shoes makes it clear that Forrest has been running a lot, but that they're also the same Nike running shoes that Jenny gave him, and which he called the best gift anyone could ever get in the wide world. And so, while Forrest surely replaced the shoes after spending so many years running across the US, he kept buying the exact same make. Plus, he was clearly heeding Lieutenant Dan's advice on keeping his feet good and healthy by making sure that he had a quality clean pair of laces always in his shoes. 18. Forrest closes his eyes in every photo. One of the film's funniest recurring gags appears to be that Forrest is completely incapable of keeping his eyes open for a single photograph. In the Bubba Gump photo with Lieutenant Dan, the graduation picture with his mother, and the ping-pong promos, including that cardboard cutout of him, his eyes are hilariously closed every single time. Granted, many people are specially sensitive to the sharp flash of a camera bulb, but even so, you'd have to be pretty unlucky to have every damn photo come out that badly. Hey, at least in these modern days, we could probably fix that with Photoshop. 17. Tom Hanks' daughter plays a girl on the bus. One of the most heartbreaking scenes comes early on in the film, when Forrest gets on the bus to go to school, but nobody will let him sit next to them. That is, of course, until he meets Jenny. You might recall a distinctive-looking girl who simply looks at Forrest and shakes her head when he motions to sit next to her. This girl is, in fact, Tom Hanks' own daughter, Elizabeth Hanks. It's perhaps a more surprising fact because you might not even be aware that Tom Hanks has a daughter. She keeps a relatively low profile compared to two of her more famous brothers, Colin and Chet. And here's a not-so-fun fact, Elizabeth is now older than Tom was when he initially played Forrest. Do you feel old yet? 16. Forrest's uniform is clean because nobody can catch him. Forrest famously attends the University of Alabama on a football scholarship, where we see that he has an aptitude for running and running very fast. So fast, in fact, that none of the opposing teams seem to be able to catch him. This is slyly exemplified by Forrest's uniform, which hasn't got a spot of dirt on it, and that's compared to just about every other player on the field whose duds are thoroughly smeared with mud. Throughout the scene, he's the only player with pearly white pants, no matter how rough and competitive the play gets, because as Coach Bryant says, he sure is fast. 15. The shot of Jenny outside her home is inspired by an iconic painting. You may recall the scene where Jenny angrily throws rocks at her childhood home, trying to lash out at every horrible thing it represents to her. The image of Jenny collapsed in the mud, the house in the distance, is a striking one for sure, and one that Robert Zemeckis received a little inspiration in composing. The shot is actually an homage to the beloved 1948 Andrew Wyeth painting, Christina's World, which similarly depicts a woman laying in a field with a house in the background. This is one that you wouldn't necessarily get unless you're super into art, but nonetheless, if you did manage to catch it, I hope you feel very smart. 14. Bubba's helmet says, "I'd rather be shrimpin'." Obviously, in the film, Forrest enlists in the army and goes to war in Vietnam, where he becomes best friends with fellow soldier Bubba. In this whole period of the film, there's a lot of details to keep track of, so much so that you might miss what's written on Bubba's helmet. Newer, higher definition releases of the film make it easier to catch, though you can still easily fail to notice it written in its entirety. As a way to inject a little bit of personality into his uniform, Bubba has written, "I'd rather be shrimpin" on his helmet. And what could possibly be more appropriate for him to put up there? I mean, come on. 13. Forrest's blue shirts signal the passing of time. Something that fans began to pick up on in recent years is the recurring appearance of a blue plaid or checkered shirt whenever the time period shifts in the film. Though everything is always shifting and changing around Forrest, there's always one constant, and that is that he starts every new time period with his first scene in a plaid or checkered blue shirt. Beyond the fact that it helps us easily identify Forrest in his younger days, it also helps contrast the change around him, whatever it may be. Sometimes the simplest details are the best because even though maybe you didn't consciously pick up on that, I bet your brain noticed it at some point. 12. The Beach Boys foreshadow Bubba's dying words. When Forrest and Bubba first meet Lieutenant Dan, Dan tells them, "Try not to do anything stupid like getting yourself killed," or whilst the Beach Boys song Sloop John B can be heard playing in the background. Fittingly, one of the lyrics to the song is "I want to go home," which we all know tragically are Bubba's final words. As he finally succumbs to his wounds later on, he laments that he just wishes he was home. And I'd say that using the Beach Boys to foreshadow a beloved character's death is quite the cruel trick indeed. Mr. Zemeckis, we'll never forgive you for it. 11. The meaning of the writing on Forrest's helmet. Whilst it was hard to decipher what was written on Bubba's helmet because of the low res at the time and the fact that you're kind of distracted by other things like war whenever you see it, Forrest's was kind of indecipherable because it was a scrawl at best, but fear not, some people have worked it out. His helmet has written on it, bear with me, G_NMI_F 2/47, which translates, believe it or not, to Gump, no middle initial, Forrest, to identify his name, with 2/47 referring to the 2nd Battalion 47th Infantry Regiment. Though this might seem like an Easter eggy code hidden in the movie by a member of the production team, it's really nothing more than a pretty basic means of ID for Forrest and his helmet. In a way, it's sort of anticlimactic, because you almost wish it was something more personality-driven, like Bubba's message, but at the same time, it makes sense. 10. The ping-pong ball was CGI. The film's Oscar-winning VFX work is primarily attributed to the removal of an actor's legs to play an amputee later on. This obviously being Lieutenant Dan's character, and the effect being so ingeniously executed that it might prevent you from realizing the other extremely impressive visual effects shots present in the film. It might be mean of me to say that you'd be an idiot to assume that for the film Tom Hanks would, I don't know, somehow become a ping-pong pro, because there's certainly actors out there that go and learn new skills and get really good at things for movies, but I'm afraid to say this was not one of them. Tom Hanks did not become a ping-pong pro just for Forrest Gump. No, quite the opposite actually. Basically every single ping-pong ball seen in the movie is CGI. Instead of having Hanks rally the ball for real, he simply faked the motion with a paddle whilst set to a click track in order to maintain his timing, and the ball was then added in post-production. It is a totally seamless effect and thus a perfect example of invisible VFX at play. 9. Jenny's meaningful choice of suicide song. In one of the much darker periods in her life, Jenny becomes addicted to drugs and contemplates suicide while standing on a balcony, the scene being set to Lynyrd Skynyrd's Free Bird. This isn't simply Robert Zemeckis picking a cool song for Jenny's near-death experience though, because it's actually incredibly thematically appropriate. Birds are associated with Jenny throughout the film ever since that unforgettable moment early on when we see young Jenny praying. Hiding from her father, she prays, "Dear God, make me a bird so I can fly far, far, far away from here." It may be a subtle callback, but it is very effective indeed. 8. Forrest never blinks whilst playing ping pong. Now, Forrest may blink constantly when it comes to having his picture taken, but it turns out that when he's playing ping pong, he goes way down the other end of the scale. Watch Tom Hanks throughout any of the ping pong scenes and you won't see him blink once. The reason for this, when a fellow soldier introduces him to ping pong at the army hospital, he tells Forrest, "The secret to the game is, no matter what happens, never ever take your eye off the ball." Safe to say Forrest took that advice to heart. If maybe a little literally, it clearly served him well. 7. The Lincoln Memorial crowd was CGI. Another jaw-dropping visual effect that you may have never noticed was a visual effect at all takes place when Forrest gives his speech at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Given that Forrest Gump was shot in 1993, you certainly cannot be blamed for assuming that the production simply corralled like a few thousand extras to shoot the scene. But that wasn't the case at all. Instead, the crowd was replicated digitally. Only the audience members at the very front below Forrest were there for the entire shoot, whilst the crowd at the sides were created through visual effects. The crew had a pool of 1,500 extras to move around the sides of the reflecting pool in stages, allowing them then to stitch these shots together and give the impression of a massive crowd. It was incredible stuff for its time, and yet something that we totally take for granted today. 6. Forrest has grazed hands the day after punching Wesley. Sometimes the smallest, tiniest, seemingly most insignificant details can make the biggest difference, and that's because it shows us that the filmmakers were actually paying attention. Case in point, you'll remember when Jenny's abusive boyfriend Wesley slaps her at the Black Panther meetup, prompting Forrest to fly into blind rage and punch his lights out. In a small but notable feat of continuity, when Jenny leaves the next morning and Forrest hugs her goodbye, we can see minor cuts and grazes on his hands from where he put them to good use. 90% of filmmakers probably wouldn't even think to include such a minute detail. I mean, most people would never even notice it, and yet, there it is. 5. Bubba's family attended Forrest's wedding. Forrest eventually moves back to Greenbow and marries Jenny in a small, intimate service with only their closest friends and family. Though it's never explicitly stated, pay close attention and you might notice that Bubba's family are clearly part of the wedding party on the left-hand side. We never see their faces, but given that Bubba's mother is a distinctive-looking lady on the larger side, and is shown to have 3 daughters and 2 other sons earlier in the film, the fact that we see a larger woman surrounded by 5 younger people, 2 boys and 3 girls, at the wedding seems to make it pretty clear who they are. Given that Forrest sent half of his Bubba Gump Shrimp Company earnings to Bubba's family, it's not terribly surprising that they might have kept close with him. Still, it's a nice detail. 4. The smiley face card on Jenny's nightstand. Shortly before Jenny passes away from her illness, there's a shot where Forrest goes into her room to take care of her. If you really focus your eyes on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a smiley face card on her nightstand. The fact that the card has a smiley face on it is of course relevant, given that Forrest ended up unwittingly inspiring the iconic smiley face logo during an especially muddy run. Considering that the scene is mostly naturally lit, this one's actually pretty tough to spot, but trust us, it's there. 3. Tom Hanks is being doubled by his brother during the running scenes. It wouldn't seem beyond the realms of possibility that Tom Hanks would do all of his own running and jogging scenes. He was a fit guy, he wasn't too old, there's no reason that he couldn't. However, you'd be wrong in that assumption. Given some of the geographically disparate locations we see Forrest running through during the montage, the decision was made to hire a double, and not just any double. In fact, they hired Hanks' own brother, Jim. Because Jim Hanks knew his older brother's jogging gait better than anyone, he was drafted in to jog at various spots around the US with a second unit film crew. All the while, Tom could keep on shooting the main unit with Robert Zemeckis. Since then, Jim Hanks has also doubled for his brother's voice as Woody on various Toy Story short films, video games, and toys. 2. Jenny was born the day of the first atomic bomb test. When Jenny sadly passes away, Forrest goes to visit her gravestone and we catch a brief glimpse of it, revealing that her birthday is June the 16th, 1945. This might seem totally normal, but that date is actually very intentional on Zemeckis' part. It's the same day that the United States conducted the first ever test detonation of a nuclear weapon. Given that Jenny is shown throughout to be a staunch peace activist, it's pretty damn ironic that she was born the same day that the world's first nuke was launched. 1. Dorothy the bus driver quits smoking and chews gum instead. As we know, the film is bookended by scenes in which first Forrest gets on the bus to go to school, and at the end his son gets on the bus to go to school just as he did. Both buses are driven by a no-nonsense driver by the name of Dorothy, and whilst the joke seems to be that this woman is still driving the same bus route for decades, it actually goes one layer deeper. Note that in the early scene with young Forrest, she's smoking a cigarette, though amusingly, when we catch up with her again about 30 years later, she's no longer smoking, but instead maniacally chewing a big wad of gum. Hey, if that isn't character development, I don't know what is. And actually, on that note, we've reached the end of this list of 20 things that you somehow missed in Forrest Gump. If you are super eagle-eyed and have noticed any other cool, interesting details, then let us know about them in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.